The night hike. I had always loved hiking, especially at night. There was something exhilarating about the silence, the darkness, and the thrill of being alone in the wilderness. So when my friend Jake suggested we hike the Red Rock Canyon Trail at night, I was all in. We had done it before, but never this late. We started our hike at midnight, the moon barely a sliver in the sky. The trail was familiar, winding through dense woods and rocky terrain. Our flashlights cut through the darkness, casting eerie shadows on the trees. We chatted as we walked, our voices the only sound in the still night. About an hour into our hike, we reached a clearing where we usually took a break. We sat on a fallen log, drinking water and catching our breath. Suddenly, we heard a rustling noise from the trees ahead. Jake and I exchanged glances, both of us straining to see what it was. "Probably just a deer," Jake said, shrugging it off. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As we continued our hike, the rustling noise followed us. It was subtle at first, just the occasional crack of a twig or rustle of leaves. But then it grew louder, more persistent, as if something was tracking us. I shone my flashlight into the woods but saw nothing. "Jake, do you hear that?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "Yeah, man. It's probably just some animal." "Don't worry about it," he replied, though he sounded unsure. We pressed on, but the feeling of being watched was growing stronger. My heart raced, and my palms were sweaty. Then, out of nowhere, we heard a blood-curdling scream. It was inhuman, a sound I'd never heard before. We stopped in our tracks, terror gripping us. "What the hell was that?" Jake whispered, his face pale. Before I could respond, we saw movement ahead. A figure emerged from the trees, hunched and grotesque. It looked like a deer, but its eyes were wrong, too intelligent, too human. It stared at us, unblinking. "Run!" Jake shouted, grabbing my arm. We bolted down the trail, our flashlights bouncing wildly. I could hear the creature behind us, its footsteps heavy and relentless. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I didn't dare stop. We reached the clearing again and stumbled into it, gasping for breath. The creature was nowhere to be seen, but the feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. We didn't waste any time, running as fast as we could back to the trailhead. When we finally reached my car, we jumped in and sped away, not looking back. It wasn't until we were miles away that we dared to speak. "That was a skinwalker," Jake said, his voice shaky. "I've heard stories, but I never thought..." "Jesus." I nodded, still in shock. I had heard the legends too, but I had never believed them. Now, I knew better. The wilderness held more than just animals and trees. It held something dark, something ancient, something that should never be disturbed. Story 2. The Cabin in the Woods. It was supposed to be a relaxing weekend getaway. My girlfriend Emily and I had rented a cabin deep in the woods, miles away from civilization. We needed a break from the stress of work and city life, and this secluded cabin seemed perfect. The first day was idyllic. We hiked, swam in the nearby lake, and enjoyed the peace and quiet. As night fell, we built a fire and roasted marshmallows, laughing and talking under the stars. It was perfect until we heard the howling. It started as a distant, eerie sound, barely audible over the crackling fire. But then it grew louder, closer. It didn't sound like any animal I'd ever heard. It was a low, guttural howl filled with menace. Emily and I exchanged uneasy glances. "What is that?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe a coyote." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. There was something off about that howl, something almost human. We decided to call it a night and went inside, locking the doors and windows. I double-checked everything, my nerves on edge. Emily was already in bed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there watching us. Around midnight, I was jolted awake by a loud thud. I sat up, heart pounding, and listened. There it was again, a heavy thud against the door. I got out of bed and crept to the living room. where the front door shuddered with each impact. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaky. No answer, just another thud. I peeked through the peephole but saw nothing. I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously opened the door, shining the light outside. The beam revealed claw marks on the wooden door, deep and fresh. "Emily, wake up!" I shouted, slamming the door shut and locking it again. She came running, eyes wide with fear. "What's going on?" "Something's out there," I said, showing her the claw marks. "We need to leave. Now." We hurriedly packed our things, the howling growing louder and more frantic. Just as we were about to leave, we heard scratching at the window. I shone the flashlight towards it and saw a face staring back at us. It was gaunt, with sunken eyes and a twisted mouth. It looked almost human, but not quite. Emily screamed, and I grabbed her hand, pulling her towards the back door. We ran to the car, throwing our bags in and speeding down the dirt road. The howling followed us, echoing through the trees. We didn't stop until we reached the nearest town, hours later. Shaking, we told the locals what had happened. An old man listened, his face grave. "You encountered a skinwalker," he said. "They're ancient, evil spirits that can take the form of animals or humans. You're lucky you got away." We left the town the next morning, vowing never to return to those woods. The weekend that was supposed to be relaxing had turned into a nightmare, one that we would never forget. Story 3. The Desert Encounter. I had always loved the solitude of the desert. There was something about the vast, empty expanse that calmed me. So, when I had the chance to take a solo camping trip to the Sonoran Desert, I jumped at it. I set up camp near a small outcropping of rocks, far from any roads or towns. The sunset was breathtaking, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. As night fell, I built a fire and settled in, enjoying the tranquility. Around midnight, I was awakened by the sound of footsteps outside my tent. I sat up, listening intently. The steps were slow, deliberate, circling my campsite. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent, shining the light into the darkness. At first, I saw nothing. But then, just beyond the edge of the light, I saw a figure standing still. It looked like a coyote, but there was something off about it. Its eyes glowed an unnatural shade of yellow, and its body seemed to shift and ripple. "Hey!" I shouted, trying to scare it off. The figure didn't move. Instead, it slowly began to change. Its limbs elongated, its body stretching and contorting. Within moments, it stood upright on two legs, its face morphing into something almost human. I stumbled back, heart racing. The creature let out a low growl, its eyes fixed on me. I grabbed my bag and ran, not caring about the campsite or the fire. I just knew I had to get away. I ran for what felt like hours, the creature's growls echoing in the darkness. When I finally stopped to catch my breath, I realized I had no idea where I was. The desert was a maze of shadows and rocks, and I was hopelessly lost. The growling grew closer, and I knew I couldn't outrun it forever. I found a small crevice between two rocks and squeezed in, hoping the creature wouldn't find me. I could hear it sniffing around, its growls growing louder. I held my breath, praying it would pass by. Minutes felt like hours as I waited, the tension unbearable. Finally, the growling began to fade, and I dared to peek out. The creature was gone, but the fear lingered. I stayed hidden until dawn, too scared to move. When the first light of morning broke, I cautiously emerged from my hiding spot and made my way back to my campsite. It was deserted, the fire long extinguished. I packed up and left the desert, vowing never to return. The memory of that night still haunts me, a reminder that some things are better left undisturbed. The desert, with all its beauty and solitude, held a darkness I would never forget.